Okay, today we're going to talk a little bit about speciation. And to introduce the topic, I have a little thought experiment for us to engage in. So after we've spent a lot of time talking about the anti-evolution theorem, Hardy-Weinberg, today we're getting back to evolution. And again, remember we've defined evolution as a change in the genetic makeup of a population over time. And we talked about the peppered moths, and most people get it, all right? You change the environment, especially under the effects of pollution, and when you change the environment, you're changing what characteristics of the moths are selected for. And some of the moths were selected for, and moths were selected against. And people get that, right? That the population changes characteristics as the environment changes. But I think what's hardest for people to understand, and myself included, is how do you get from one type of organism into a totally different type of organism? I mean, in the peppered moths, we saw clearly the effect of natural selection, but they're still moths. So I have a little thought experiment to help us out with. And one thing to keep in mind is, I find sort of ironic. We as humans are not programmed by evolution to understand evolutionary time. We are programmed to understand what a dozen is, what 100 is. Basically, we're programmed to understand the size of our family and size of our tribe. And again, the same appears to hold true for time. We can visualize a decade or 50 years or 100 years because that's close to a human lifetime. But what if I say 10 million years or 100,000 years? Do you really get two different images in your mind? No, I don't think so. So ironically, we are not programmed by evolution to understand evolutionary time. So we're going to start off with a little true-false quiz. Not really a true-false quiz. So here it is. True or false, some humans have 6 fingers per hand. And the answer that we've already talked about is true. This is caused by one gene. And it codes for the trait called polydactyly. And as I've mentioned before, it is actually a dominant allele. It is a dominant gene. But most humans are homozygous recessive for digit number. Another true-false question. Some humans have blue skin. Surprisingly enough, this is also true. There were some rumors of some people who lived in the hills of Kentucky that had blue skin, and when scientists went to investigate, sure enough, they found the Fugate family that had blue skin. It's estimated that each of us have several very weird alleles, like blue skin, or I don't know, tails or webbed fingers or something. So it's estimated we have about 7 of these really weird alleles, but these alleles are very rare in the human population. So what are the odds that you marry someone else with the allele to have a tail or webbed fingers? Well, it's highly unlikely unless you marry maybe a 3rd or 4th cousin. Then the probability goes way up. So yes, in the hills, in Kentucky, again, there's these small towns where everybody's related to everybody, and that's where they found the Fugates, blue skin. And they actually were able to cure them of the blue skin. But the point I want to make now, is there really a survival advantage or disadvantage to having 6 fingers per hand? Really, no. There's no advantage to having 6 fingers per hand, and apparently it's not selected against. These people still find dates and mates. Of course, a lot of time they just have the extra digit amputated because, first of all, it's hard to find gloves that fit, and second of all, if you've ever seen the movie The Princess Bride, the villain had 6 fingers, and nobody wants to, think they're the villain with 6 fingers. At any rate, there's no survival advantage or disadvantage to having 6 fingers right now or blue skin. But now we begin our little thought experiment. Let's say, this is not a pretty thought experiment. Let's say tomorrow, oh no, holy heck breaks out, we go to nuclear war. World War III breaks out, nuclear warfare. And the good news for you probably wouldn't have to take your next biology test. The bad news for you, that we were all together taking our Hardy-Weinberg quiz in the biology building, and we heard World War III break out, so we run down to that bomb shelter underneath the Science Center. And there we waited out. So finally, when our supplies run out. Oh, and the bad news is you'd have time with me. I'm sorry, your professor. You'd be stuck with your professor for 18 months. So finally, after 18 months, we get out of the bomb shelter, we climb out, and oh my gosh, everything's terrible. The infrastructure's gone, the building's gone. Now, this actually might cheer you up a little bit. If humans were ever foolish enough to engage in World War III, we would not obliviate all life on the planet. Do you know what would survive? Yes, the cockroaches would inherit the earth, as well as some, radiation-loving bacteria. So it just so happens that across the street we find in Woodland Cemetery these trees that are full of these cockroaches. And these are burrowing insects, these certain species of cockroaches, and they have 7 tunnels that go toward their nest. Well, lo and behold, we're trying to clog up 5 of the holes with our fingers of one hand, and we reach down the 6th tunnel, and these cockroaches are really smart. They go scurrying out the back. And this is very important because we need our cockroaches to eat. This is going to be our source of calories and nutrition, and they're sort of crunchy, a little bit of salt, they're not too bad. But here these cockroaches are running out the back because there's 7 holes in this tunnel. Who suddenly has a survival advantage? How about the 6-fingered humans? They can clog up 6 holes and reach down the 7th hole with their hand and start munching away. So suddenly, 6-fingered humans might have a survival advantage. All right, that's sort of a dorky story, but maybe you could think of another way that 6-fingered humans would suddenly have a survival advantage if the environment changed. To continue our story, there's this blue haze due to all the radiation, and this is total breakdown in government. I mean, it's anarchy, so it's very dangerous to be out and about, and everybody shoots anybody. I told you this is a terrible story. Just looking for food. So suddenly in the blue haze, who also has a survival advantage? It is the blue-skinned people. There we go. So 2 things are going to happen right now. So first of all, we see the sight of cockroaches, so we walk back to our bomb shelter and we just faint dead away. We just faint at the sight of all these cockroaches. And we just fall soundly asleep. And we wake up, let's say, after 50 years. So we wake up 50 years later. Just go with me. We survive for 50 years. We wake up 50 years later. Now, if all these environmental conditions persisted, what might most of the humans look like in just 2 generations? In 50 years? It could, just like the pepper moths, we could easily go in 2 generations. If these environmental conditions persisted, we could go to be 90% blue-skinned with 6-fingered humans. Wow, that would be really crazy. In fact, we are so shocked about this, we as a class, we fall asleep again. But this time we fall asleep for 1,000 years. Maybe we fall asleep for 10,000 years. Maybe we fall asleep for 1,000,000 years or 10 million years. And that would even be short in evolutionary time. So let's say we fall asleep for 10 million years and the environment keeps changing and different traits are selected for. We might wake up 1,000,000, 10 million years later, and our descendants, meaning the descendants of humanity, might look totally different than ourselves. Besides blue skin and 6 fingers, they might have all sorts of different traits. They might, again, look totally different from us, but they would be the descendants of humanity. Now, how would we know? How would we know if they're still human or not? How would we know if they're still humans or if they have diverged enough to be a separate species? Well, for the sake of science, we'd all have to try to find dates and mates and, find boyfriends and girlfriends and attempt to breed with these blue humans. And if we could mate and produce fertile offspring, we would still be considered one species. That is the biological definition of a species. 2 organisms are the same species if they can mate and produce fertile offspring. So even if they looked totally different phenotypically, if we could still mate and produce fertile offspring, we would still all be Homo sapien. However, if we had diverged enough, if there were enough differences, whether they were behavioral or whatever, we'll go over some of these. If for whatever reason we could not mate with these blue humans and produce fertile offspring, we would have diverged. We would have two separate species now of humans. We would be Homo sapiens and maybe Homo aqua avians. I don't know. But the Homo sapiens and Homo aquans, they would be two different species of humans with a very, very recent common ancestor. So that is sort of, again, a little silly thought experiment to illustrate two ideas. One, of speciation, and two is that to really understand these things, we have to remember evolutionary time. And just please note, it's hard for us to really comprehend how many changes could occur in 100,000 years, 1,000,000 years, 10 million years. I hope you enjoyed our little thought experiment, and I'll see you in the next module or the next lecture.